Hey guys, this is Amy from School of Motion with part 2 of our Bringing Your Illustrator Files into After Effects series. This is the final part in the series, and we're going to go over a bunch of other things that you can encounter when you're bringing those Illustrator files into After Effects that we just didn't have time to get to in part 1. Don't forget to sign up to be a VIP member at the bottom of this page. We're actually going to give you all the project files that we use this time in this lesson. Thanks for watching. Let's get started. Alright guys, let's get started on part 2 of bringing your Illustrator files into After Effects. So you might notice that our original file is up right now, and this is not the file we'll be working with. This is actually because we got a little bit of feedback from one of the animation bootcamp students, Renee. He pointed out this wonderful feature that I did not notice before in After Effects when you go to the Save As dialog. So if we save as, we can actually save each artboard to a separate file. Hooray! So this will cut down on some time. You just hit OK there, and I'll actually show you what it did. So what it did was it resaved our original scene in this folder that I named Artboards. You're probably going to want to make a new folder for that reason so you don't confuse yourself. And then actually, if we open up these other files, you will see Scene 2 is now isolated. Scene 1, only thing there. And Artboard 3, only thing there. So, perfect. Obviously, you might want to rename these to something that makes more sense to you, but that cuts down on just all that time having to hit File, Save As, and also on you accidentally screwing up and overwriting a file. So, really cool. Thank you, Renee. Awesome tip. Alright, now this is the file that we're actually going to be working with. So this one right here is the one that would be handed off to you that you're going to have to prep for After Effects to be animated. This is the intermediate file of what we're going to be setting up today to get this stuff to function right in After Effects. Now it looks a little overkill, but it's actually not for what we're going to be doing with it. Lots of layers. And this is our actual final result in After Effects. So, I'm going to go through and RAM preview this for you guys. Now, as you can see here while it's RAM previewing, we have all kinds of little moving parts and pieces going on. We have some trim path effects going on this type here, on the A and the O. We've got these wavy lines going on in the background that are actually kind of clipping this grainy stuff as a matte. We've also got all of these circles moving independently, all animated. We've got these dashed lines shooting out from the center point. And if you look down here, there's a little bit of like a flickering kind of effect going on these lighter areas here, and there's actually some light paths going across. So there's a bunch of different stuff that needs to be addressed in this file. Alright, and this is what it kind of looks like when we're done. So you'll see we have a mix of things that need to be converted into shape layers, a bunch of pre-comps, and then stuff that actually we are going to leave alone as an Illustrator layer. So let's jump back into Illustrator and start prepping this file. Alright, so here's our original file. Now, the first thing is we don't need all this color palette stuff. That's just stuff from the designer that they left over. Same thing with this mask. This is just used so that they can see with that, like, what the final product is going to look like cut. So that can go away now. So this is what we are left with here. So we have this upper tone that's kind of tinting the project. And also you are going to want to have your appearance and your transparency palettes up and ready when you're looking through a file with these kinds of raster effects, because this is where you're going to see what is going on with those. So if we hit this little target circle here, you're going to see this has an opacity of 15% with a soft light and a grain effect on it. Now that's actually very important because if we need to take this into After Effects, I will actually show you what's going to happen. We're going to import that original file. We don't. Well, we didn't save it, but that's okay. We'll just pick any one of these. And see how this is breaking? That's because there are transparencies and blending modes and other effects layered on these. This one will break. See, there's some more transparency breaking. And this one, these gray spots, that's from the effects breaking from Illustrator in After Effects. So, no good. Can't use it. Let's fix it. Delete these really quick. Alright. So, what we want to do with this one is I actually just made a note for myself up top. That this is like the upper tone, so like almost like an adjustment layer. And I'd have a 15% opacity on it with soft light and grain. So all I'm going to do is rename this. Actually, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy the name. But I'm going to rename this with my notes so I know what's going on with this layer when I get into After Effects. And I'm going to remove those effects from here because they're just going to break. So delete the effect. And then we're going to move this back to a normal layer with 100% opacity on it. And then we're just going to shut it off. So this is now ready to bring into After Effects. You could also probably rebuild this in After Effects if you wanted to, using just a solid, as long as you know what those things were that you used previously. But I want to leave it in here. So the next thing that I want to address is going to be down here, actually. So this was that neat thing that I was talking about last lesson with the blend mode, or not blend mode, blend shape. There we go. The blend shape. So here's this kind of cool little trick that you can do. Blend shapes actually stay editable until you expand their appearance. So if you want to quickly get this kind of scaled stepped effect with a nice even gradient between two colors, you can go in and use the specified steps in the blend shape, and we can still change this too. So if we don't want 4 anymore, we can say 10, and there's 10. Or we can go back to 4 and hit OK. Now, we could convert this in After Effects, but we're trying to do as much planning ahead of time instead of bringing something in and then having to do all that work in another program. So what we're going to do to convert these blend shapes so that they can be animatable, guess that's a word, it is today, so that we can get this nice kind of staggered effect that's going on where they're pushing out. All those have to be separate. Come on now. Alright, we're going to go up to Object and Expand and hit OK, and there you go. Those are ready for us now. Check that out, and we'll do the same thing here. Object, Expand, and hit OK. So those are actually ready now, and let's move them onto their own layers. Well, they're mostly ready, actually. I'm kind of a liar about that. So let's move these actually onto upper layers, as we discussed last time, where... Oh, holy crap. We'll be right back. Alright, so don't forget to save. That's a lesson as why we save our files. Because you never know when the program's just going to be like, I'm done right now. So we're back. I moved these onto their own layer. And really quickly, we're actually going to break these out into their own paths ahead of time instead of using explode shape layer later on in After Effects. So this was another piece of feedback. Somebody finally explained to me what I was doing wrong with my life when it comes to getting this option, the release to layers sequence, to work. I didn't think about this, but there's two different ways you can select things in Illustrator. There's actually selecting like these subgroups using the target little circly guy, or there's actually selecting the layer name. So what you need to do is select the layer name, and that's going to bring back release to layers sequence. So you don't actually have to add that second layer. That's just some way that I tricked myself into thinking that it was working. So thank you very much to Sean Kimber on Vimeo and Sam from Animation Bootcamp for helping me figure that one out. Awesome work, guys. Alright, so we want to actually click on the layer and release to layers sequence. And, oh, they're grouped. They're grouped. Ungroup these things. We don't want them grouped. We just want our layer release to layers. Sequence, there it goes. Don't leave things in groups if you're using release to layers, because it will just kind of group the layer. It does that. And there we go. You don't even have to pull them out one by one. Easy peasy. Now I'm going to actually go in and rename these properly. Alright, so those are all renamed and broken out onto their own layers now and ready to bring into After Effects. So the next thing we're going to address is actually the stuff that's kind of left over in this sun layer right now. So these things back here, let's take a closer look at them. Actually, we need to bring them up above where they belong again. Mind your layer order. So if we look at these, we can see that there's this like wavy line going on here, but when we're actually highlighting this, they're all circles. Now, you might be wondering why this is happening, and there's an easy explanation for this. If you look under Appearance, and we actually select one of these, we will take you. What's happening is there's a warp effect put onto it. So if we turn off that warp, and actually we'll turn it off on all of these, you can see they're snapping back to what they were before. Circles. They were just rings that were done in Illustrator, and then an effect was put on them to get them to bend in that certain way. So if we actually bring these into After Effects, they will completely break, and that's where you're getting that gray box. It's because After Effects does not like these types of old-fashioned raster effects, or any of the raster effects actually from Illustrator will not come over. So the way that I dealt with this to be able to animate, just give her a second, she's got to think about things. To be able to get that movement, we're gonna go to quarter res. There we go. You can see those lines back there moving. Now, what I actually had to do was go in and rebuild those paths so that I could use them later on in After Effects to turn them into mats like this. So there it is moving along, but we need a path to be able to move first. So let's go back into Illustrator and we'll set that up really quick. We're just going to use Ye Olde pen tool and draw these out. Now, I am going to put a stroke on these. Whoa. We have lost our path. Come back here. Okay, there he is. We are in the sun layer. Good, good. So here's our path. I am going to kind of bump this stroke up so I can see it, so I know that it's there. And I'm going to touch it up a little bit too, because this is slightly off. And then we do the same thing for all 3 of those paths. Now, because of the way that this is going to be animated, we don't have to be super, super precise or anything. We just have to get the general shape down and actually follow along things. Alright, and with a couple last touch-ups here and there, I'm going to knock these strokes back a few points, because they're all pretty big. 1, 2, 3. And we'll just knock them back to like a 2-point stroke right now. So that works. Alright, so now we have those paths. And we are going to bring those 3 out onto their own layers. And we're actually going to do this just real quick this way, instead of using release. Okay. So the next thing that we need is we actually need that grainy kind of look so that we can cut that as a matte in After Effects. We're using an alpha. So if you're curious as to exactly how I built it in After Effects, I'm not going to get too much into that. The project file is included with this, all the Illustrator assets and that After Effects project. So you can dig more into that on your own. But I just know that I need this grainy stuff as a flat layer now, and I'm going to leave it as a flat layer, as an Illustrator layer, and I'm not going to turn that into a shape layer ever when it's in After Effects. It's just going to stay the same. So what I wanted to do with this is I need to go in and I need to find just this warp effect and delete that off of there. And now I should have just a circle with that effect in it. Now, I don't really want this to actually be a circle. I want this to cover my whole artboard, just in case this thing gets a little bit crazy and comes all the way out to like the other edges. So I don't want this to just be limited within a certain range. So what I'm going to do is actually make a new box. And I don't actually need this. Alright, so we have our box. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this right here that says click to target, drag to move appearance if we hover over it. So we are just going to grab this. Come on. Oopsies. Didn't go according to plan, did it? Alright, we want this one. Grab it and move it. You can see it kind of popping there up to our rectangle. And now our rectangle has inherited all of the appearance properties. You can kind of see this edge over the top here. That's the appearance properties of that circle that is now just an orange circle. And we can delete that. And now we're going to want to do the same thing for our other warp paths to get those prepped. Alright, so now all of those are ready to be used as mats for this particular effect that we had going on. So now let's just do that release to layers sequence and bring these out. And if I renamed them when they were in there just to save myself the trouble, so I know, okay, this is the outer mat. Instead of scratching my head later going, what was that supposed to be? Alright, and then let's just get these in some sort of order so that they're hanging out next to each other. So we want our path above each one and have them just be kind of buddies right now. So there you go, that portion is ready to go into After Effects. Now, the next thing that we are going to address is the white sun. And the white sun has these transparencies on them. Now, we don't have to worry about that too much. We just want to actually get these onto their own layers to be animated. So if you look into our prepped file, here's our white sun. And I actually did notate the transparencies on there just in case I need that information later. It's always better to be a little bit overly prepared than underprepared. So we're going to go through, break those out, and rename them. And this is where you're going to find your opacity. It's down here in that appearance tab again. Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring these out, these light dashed lines. Those are going to go onto their own layer while I deal with these. Now, I've kind of developed my own shorthand with renaming things over time. It's not always the most consistent thing. It makes sense to me. It may not make the most sense to other people, so just do what works for you, and remember that you may be handing this file off to somebody later on. So try and be courteous, too, when you're doing these things. Alright, so that's taken care of. Now the next thing that I want to mention is actually this layer 26 with the dashed lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into After Effects really quickly so I can demonstrate something, and then we'll come back to this layer. So back here in After Effects, if we actually go down to, you see this dashed lines layer here? Let's just pre-comp this really quick. Come into here. There they are. Okay. So here's our dashed lines. Now you would think that you could just hit this button up here and have these strokes be preserved, because that's actually what these are strokes from Illustrator. Well, when we hit this button, you can see it's thinking just a little bit too hard for comfort right now. So we'll let it go for a couple more seconds for demonstration's sake. And then we're going to hit skip. And we're going to check out what it did. And look at that. See that little, this little guy, watch him move slowly up the chain. What's happening is After Effects, instead of reading this in as, oh, that's a stroke, it's just making a path out of a new shape out of every single dash is what's happening. So this is clearly terrible news. We don't want to do that. It's completely unmanageable. So this is something where you're going to want to either expand the appearance, depending on what you're going to be animating. You can expand the appearance over in Illustrator, you can leave them all on their own layer, or if you're doing this kind of effect that I was doing, where you just have them shooting out, I just rebuilt these strokes inside of After Effects as a new stroke with a dashed line. So just do a rebuild on it if you're doing something like this. Otherwise, plan ahead and know that those will not come in nicely into After Effects. So what I did was I actually just left this layer alone due to the fact that they don't play nicely, and then I rebuilt them because of, as I stated before, that effect that I was using. So this is just now a template layer, and we're going to leave it here. Alright, so we've made a fair amount of progress in breaking this file down already. So the next part of this that we want to deal with is actually these main shapes here. And there's a lot going on inside of these groups. There's all kinds of dashed lines here. We have all these different paths. Here's more groups. It's kind of a little bit messy in here, but it's not too bad. It's manageable. We can work through this. So to get it to look like this, where that kind of flash happens, and then each one of these just kind of drops in transparency on its own, we need all these shapes separated out into their own layers, which is what I did. So you can see this light left here, and this has all of those as a mat. And actually, if we go into here, we can see it all broken out. So we are going to go in to Illustrator and take care of that stuff so that we can use these paths. Now, if we actually tried to do that with this layer in After Effects right now as is, where are you? Well, you know what? Let's save our file and try it. So, radio example, composition, retain layer styles. Retain layer sizes? Something like that. Retain the layers. Radio example. And we're actually going to take this purple base, I believe is the layer. You can already see how things have kind of broken in here. Now, see, none of our blend modes came over. So, if we actually try and divide up, not this one. Yep, those two. So we'll just take the purple screen and we'll convert it. Everything broke, and there's just a ton of paths here to deal with. This is not the most efficient way to work with things. So, we don't want to do this. Now, we'll go forward in time and break all these up. And as I said before, make sure you watch out down here, because there's hidden opacities in here. Alright, we have a rogue light layer. So the first thing we're going to do is get organized. We're going to find all of these light layers, and we're just going to drop them into one spot. So there's another light layer, and we're going to drop that in. And here's... This is just one shape that's kind of underneath. You can see what it's doing. It's creating that highlight again on this side and this side. So those are going to stay on their own. The base is going to be on its own. Now let's think about this. We want our darks together. And then this is actually a copy of the base, and it's got a 60% overlay with some grain on it. So this is kind of another adjustment layer. So we want to put that on its own layer. Our dashed lines again, we're gonna keep those guys on a layer. All right. Where do you belong? Yep, you were that and you were that. Okay. So here's another thing that I noticed about this. This path here, it's not separate. So we have to do a little bit of Illustrator work because we want to keep flexibility in our file, and we need to cut this guy really quick. So to do that, we need to find our path, and we can actually literally go in and cut it. Alright, so I want to cut this path apart. So I'm going to isolate it, which I turned double click to isolate back on. If I can ever grab the path, I will isolate it. Double click. See, you can see this path's kind of screwy, and I don't want to deal with that, so I'm just going to come in and fix it one way or another. Yee. Oh, there we go. Alright, scissor tool worked, it looks like. Did it work? Oh, it did work. Look at that. Beautiful. Two paths. No longer one path. That's why it was yelling at me. It just worked before I could notice it did work. Cool. So those are now separate, so we don't ever have to worry about that again. So now we're going to actually take our darks out and put them into left and right, and then rename them. This is a whole lot of renaming, but I cannot stress how important good organization is. If you don't organize and think ahead, you'll end up having to go back and redo a lot of stuff, and it can become a big headache. And nobody likes to redo work. or I have to reopen files. When you're working in Illustrator especially, it helps to kind of lock off layers that you're not using. So that way you can actually grab things a lot easier. Like this purple screen layer keeps getting in my way, so I'm just gonna lock that off. I'm gonna group those. Grouping is a great way to use it as a temporary container almost. So I'm just grabbing all of my little components and hopefully not moving them in the process. Wacom pen's a bit sensitive. There we go. So now I have all my temporary containers. So now I know, okay, this is going to my right, and this one's going to my left, and same thing here. So this one's on my right, and this one's on my left. And now when I actually go in, and sometimes it's just easier to just kind of make your own layers here temporarily and just keep breaking them out like that to where you're staying organized at the same time. Because otherwise you're going to have 30 some odd layers if you ungroup all of these at the same time and then do a release to layers sequence, and then you're going to have like layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, so on through like whatever it might be. And that just turns into a big headache. Some of you may be wondering why I use so many underscores in my naming conventions, and that's because I was actually originally trained to use Maya, and Maya does not accept spaces. So it's just kind of an old holdover habit. You don't actually have to do that. That's just something that I do. I've just gotten used to it. And if you watch while I'm working on this, I'm actually sorting them kind of in numerical order from like top to bottom, because I found that was the easiest for me to remember. And it's that sort of just little organizational things that are going to make everything that much easier at the end of the day. I mean, I know this is moving in quite fast motion, but you can probably see a little bit of what I'm doing. Alright, so all of those little pieces are now on their own individual layers, which definitely did happen in this final project here. You can see them all. There it is. LO1, LO2, so on and so forth. Hanging out, just waiting. And some of these, as I said, did get pre-comped, so that's why you want them separated. Alright, so back to this layer here. Now, we have two bases, and when I did this the first time, I did separate those out. We have our top overlay, our dashed lines did go onto their own layer, and our base ended up on its own layer. And that's again so that we have that flexibility that we might need later on down the line. So we're going to rename this one to top, and it has a 60% overlay on it. 60% overlay for our blend mode, and we are just going to hopefully drag this out. No, needs to be on its own layer. Okay, so this overlay is just that, it's an overlay. Now we want to try and keep everything in order as much as possible, so that's just going to get bumped right up to the top right now. And our dashed lines are going to come up to the top also, because those belong above those paths. These belong below, so we're just going to grab those out. Now this purple base actually did have a opacity of 85%, so, and that's uniformly over the whole thing here. Now, when I rebuilt this file, depending on what I had to move over, I adjusted the transparency or opacity, however you want to say it, as needed. So this sucker's almost done. Finally, at long last, we are almost finished separating this file out. And then we can actually go into After Effects and start having fun with it instead of just all this tedious setup work. Alright, so now we've got some type to address, and we already know from our previous lesson that type just completely blows up as soon as we try to bring it into After Effects from Illustrator. The two just don't like each other, so we are going to outline all of this type. These two were already outlined conveniently, and they're broken out into their own individual paths. It's just this one up here that's the stroke, that's a trap. So you're going to want to Control-Shift-O, and that will outline your type for you. And then, again, make note of these appearances, so that when stuff breaks on the other side, we can bring it back. So this one, 75%. And I'm actually going to leave these grouped together on their own layers. Liar right now. I'm just gonna undo what I did. I only need one layer. Alright. Red. Type. Orange type. These ones I'm actually going to leave together just because they're pretty easy to break apart. Like, I don't have to worry about something blowing up in my face when I get into After Effects if I do need to separate this type out. So I'm actually going to just leave these together and then use explode shape layers if I need them. This has hard light on it. And this one has something. I thought. Yes, it does. 52% overlay. Alright, so that's that. We have a file completely prepped and ready for After Effects now. And we shouldn't run into any issues with rebuilding this once we get into that program. So I'm going to quickly take you into After Effects now with that file that we just built. And we're going to import this guy. Back in Composition, Retain Layer Sizes. Import. Wait a moment, and there it is, ready to go. It takes a second to RAM preview, but wait, I believe there is something I forgot to tell you guys about this file. So because we're using raster effects, I actually doubled the size of the file as a safety. Instead of going with that minimum resolution of, we'll say the client wanted 1200 by 1200, I believe. See what our artboard says. Yes, 1200 by 1200. So that was the dimension that the client specified because that's what actually needs to be delivered. But because these raster effects just do not hold up inside of After Effects, I like to make the file bigger than the bare minimum just in case I need to zoom in on something or have something, you know, get closer to the camera or the screen or scale, because that will mess a bunch of stuff up. So what we can do is make our artboard twice as big. So that's 2400. I forgot that does that. Easy enough. Okay. So that's taken care of. Select it all, and you can hit Alt to scale from the center of an object. So Alt and Shift, and that'll constrain it. So we can easily just drag it out to its new dimensions. And it's going to think about everything because it's got to go through and redo all these raster effects. And if you notice, we have something that got left behind. So we're going to go back really quick and Control-Z that. Alright, so let's go find that guy that got left behind. Now, a good way to do this is that when you select everything, go up to Object and hit Unlock All. So this means something did get left behind. It was locked up. So you hit unlocked all, and there's the offending circle right there. So that's unlocked now. Grab it all, Alt-Shift, click and drag. And this will get us pretty dang close. And then wait for everything to move along again. We can recenter it back up again. Look at that. Perfect. Wonderful. So save that. So now that it's at double its previous size, so we don't have to worry about any of those raster effects getting all messed up if we do have to make it bigger in After Effects later on or zoom into something. Cool. So let's import this again. That's the example. Composition retains layer sizes. And it'll import it. And here's everything as planned. So now you can get in there and actually start animating your project. Very exciting. Congratulations, you've survived. But wait! There's still some stuff that's not quite right, and I'm actually going to walk you through that on the finished file here. So, in this finished file, I'm going to actually bring up our switches here. If you notice, I had to rebuild these blend modes here. So, let's actually bring this up to full. Give it a second to think. Alright, so what it's going to do is it's going to bring everything in as normal, because none of that stuff's going to read over. So this is why we made those notes, and you're just going to end up going through and looking for what gets you the closest rebuild to this, because some of these aren't going to be an exact 100% match, but they're going to be pretty darn close. And I know some of them I actually ended up changing a little bit just because I thought they looked a little bit better in the end. So if you kind of go through, I hate it when it clicks like that. So you can see on like a normal, and then I changed the opacity here, or there's a darken, or whatever you happen to want to use. There's add. I believe I said this was a hard light originally. Okay, so I just kind of want to elaborate on something really quickly about how After Effects is going to be handling these files. Now, when I say stuff breaks, I'm typically talking about that it breaks when you convert it to a shape layer to be used in After Effects. So if you needed to do something like a trim path, or I don't know, there's probably other examples out there, I just can't think of any right now, but there's numerous reasons why you would convert something to a shape layer instead of you leaving it as your Illustrator artwork. That's what's actually breaking all the transparencies and stuff. So you'll see it did a really good job preserving all of these things, but if you look, the opacity is reading at 100%, even though we know in Illustrator some of this stuff was set up with different transparencies on it. So it's just treating these kind of as solids, like solid shapes. Now, I actually ran into an instance with this where I used the fact that After Effects will break these things to my advantage, and that was when I was actually setting up that kind of flickering effect that we're getting here. This shouldn't be on full at all. This should be on auto. There we go. Look at how much quicker that works. Alright, so that kind of flickering effect there with the light coming up on these light colored squares here, that was actually because when I converted them to shape layers, they went back up to a complete solid like that at 100%. So I was actually able to go in and key all of these values so that I could get that nice bright white without having to go and rebuild a whole shape or something. So that was kind of a neat instance where it wasn't actually infuriating that After Effects doesn't respect these transparencies and pull them over. Now, it would be nice if it did do that when you converted it to a shape layer and it could pull all that data. That would be awesome too, because I'm sure I could just crank it back up to 100 and everything would be fine. But I guess for once I was like, oh, that's a little bit cool that it did that. So that's my story about how we got that flickering effect by using the breaking. All right, now I want to mention one more thing. I'm gonna actually bring this up full screen one more time. So you see this little cut here? That was my bad. I completely forgot to convert these, or to make them shape layers so that these wouldn't get cut when I was working with them. So that was my fault. Now, if I can find my pre-comp really quick. There it is, the sun. We're going into the sun. And we'll go into the outer sun. So this is where I screwed up. You can see that clipping up there from the edge of the layer. There it is. It's getting cut off. That looks silly. So this is kind of a cool little bonus thing about the way that After Effects handles things. You would think that I'd be screwed because I already keyed this stuff, but I'm actually not. So if we select all of our layers and we bring up our buddy explode shape layers and we fix that window size and we convert them, note that all of these guys are now turned off and these guys are turned on. So I'm actually going to drop them down to the bottom. Bottom, not top. Okay, they've been dropped to the bottom. So those guys are all shut off and everything is still moving. So After Effects actually preserved my keys, thankfully, so it wasn't a huge nightmare to fix this. Now, it's still cut, and that's because we need to just hit this remove artboard button again, which we went through last time. There we go. So now our artboard is removed, and our circles are nice and continuous. We don't get that cut anymore, and everything is good. Now there's one more thing that I almost completely forgot to mention, and that was, you know how we set those paths up back there so that we could cut that mat out? I actually wanted to kind of show you that really quick. I was using this path, or some of the other paths, and what you do is when you convert them to a shape layer, all of those points that we did, that we like drew out in Illustrator, those came over. So this is fully editable, and this is exactly what we wanted from Illustrator. Now, if we had brought in that raster effect, we would have just gotten that big, ugly gray thing. So that's why we rebuilt this, was so that we could retain this full editable movement here that we need to actually build that effect that I did over here with our fancy mats. Where are our fancy mats? There we go. So there's all kinds of stuff going on with those. If we actually go into one of them. There you go. And not be a negative time, so you can see that kind of moving independently there and cutting stuff out. So that's super important that we needed that editable capability there, and After Effects will read paths in that way when you convert it to a shape layer. That is the last thing that I want to mention this time. Thank you so much for watching. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this series. I hope you learned a ton of new tips and tricks about bringing your Illustrator files into After Effects. As always, please leave us your feedback, and if you like this series, share it with everybody on Facebook, Twitter, wherever it is that you hang out on the internet. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.